Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your time, your renewed time. And Koen.
Yeah, well,
kick it off.
I already mentioned it. It's also a bit about politics. And so my first statement, and you can see it as a question, as a European, I don't need European technology. I only need data sovereignty. I don't need GAIA-X. I just need a solution to safeguard my data on whatever technology that we have. What do you think, guys, about this? And of course, it's a harsh statement, but at least it makes us think about the problem. Mika, I think you're best positioned.
Yeah. Yes. All right. I need to say that already the headline what we have been putting here is a very interesting, nations, technologies, and unicorns. Because when putting your question in the context, we have to understand that there is 27 different countries which are not identical. We are also having technologies in Europe. In some areas we are very, very good. Some of the areas we are not so good. And some of the technologies we don't even have here in Europe. We are not having mobile operating system. We are not having web shops. We are not having many other things here in Europe. And then unicorn, for me, it's a definition for the startup which has been a bit more successful, and the people are not thinking only the exit or how to get the money for the next month salary payment. And then actually you are throwing on the top of this that we don't need to have all the technologies. The reality is that we don't have in Europe all the technologies, and we should be rather, how would I say, selective. We have been losing the technologies over the last 10 years in Europe, and this is something what we have been writing all the time in ENISA in the last 10 years, that we have to have a certain principal technologies, but we don't have those. And now the question is that what are those technologies what we are going to have in the future? In which countries we are able to bundle together so that making those technology developments good and fast, we are calling those this kind of competence centers. And then of course that the unicorns is that how we are first able to get the funding for the unicorns, that they would be possible wise coming as a real companies and not purchased by some other big companies outside of the Europe. And now exactly. You can't mix all these things together. This is my starting point. But you have to consider what are the things in Europe what we are able to build technology-wise, country-wise, and then unicorn-wise, and then actually saying that which are those winning technologies and combination what you can bring up. Okay, long startup and introduction to the topic, but now I'll let the other ones carry on.
Yeah, sure. Who feels ready to answer on this and react on the statements of Mika? All right, go ahead.
I think we should remember what happened in the 80s. The United States were using OECD to try to convince Europeans that they would never be able to launch rockets. In the 70s, they were trying to convince Europeans that they would never be able to make aircrafts. And some people were saying that as long as they could fly with an aircraft of an airline, they don't care whether the aircraft is American or not. I think with this reasoning, we end up as a colonized country like Senegal, which is a country I know well. And there are lots of things that are combined in terms of know-how. My friends in Senegal have great ideas, but 2 years too late, because they are not the ones who create the technologies. Creating the technologies, using our technologies is very important in order to nurture ideas that are at the same level as the rest of the world. And nowadays, we are seeing something new, which we just heard right now. Now it seems China is telling us that we don't have the technologies for cloud or edge or 5G. So I'd like to give an example. The most advanced 5G technology in the world comes from a French company called Amarisoft. It is already used by large commercial 5G networks in the world. It's a virtualization 5G technology, a little software that turns a PC into a base station, and it's so good that it is even currently under consideration of certain very large Chinese industrials who are not finding this technology in China or even with American players. And I could give the same examples with AI. The #1 AI library in the world is made in Europe. Edge computing was invented in Europe. Real-time, time-sensitive networks, the best libraries are made in Europe. So we actually have absolutely all the technologies in Europe. But just like Americans in the 70s and 80s, some foreign economic powers are trying to convince us that we don't have them.
Luc, yes.
May I reply immediately to Jean-Baptiste in that sense that I'm coming from the Chinese company. And I need to say that we have been never underestimating the Europe because, as you know, I'm a Finnish citizen. And all our cloud security people are at the moment in Tampere in Finland. So all that the Huawei's cloud security is built inside of the European soil. All our mobile phone security, what we are having in Huawei phones, is built in Ruoholahti in Helsinki, because we just happen to have the best chipset security people in the whole world located in Finland. So I would never ever say that I'm coming from the Chinese company and Europe is not having anything. Question is that we are appreciating this European competitiveness and the clever people, because they are making also the success for the Chinese companies like Huawei. Okay, that was a short intervention for this.
Yeah, Luc, you wanted to say something.
Yeah.
And then you, Ralf.
Okay, thank you. That's clear that once Huawei will be independent on the security layer, probably it will shift to China. There is quite no doubt about it, and that's normal. To focus on the data only on the sovereignty is a really short-term vision, because software as a service, platform as a service are as important as infrastructure as a service layer. Software is not only shaping the way we work, but our behavior, our reflexes, our culture. And culture is at stake. It's very, very important. So I think sovereignty is at stake at each layer of the software and infrastructure industry. We have all the assets in Europe. I fully agree with what Jean-Paul states. And Cédric O, the French Minister for Digital Affairs, is welcoming the fact, it was last week, that Europe is approaching the rate of birth of American unicorns. That's something impressive. We are catching up. But what we need to ensure from now is the transition from unicorns to titans. These GAFA or BRETONES like companies, the size of continent competition, and the only one capable of challenging extra European giants. So I think, and that is something very important, we have to shift some public investment to our local champions, and that is something politics can do. Definitely our players know how to sell as well as American or Chinese people. And personally, I find it crazy to hear that from European politicians that a public procurement code prohibits us from directing public investment taxes to innovative European players. And that's something the United States and Chinese have been doing for decades.
Ralf, you wanted to react.
Yeah, I think it's important to separate the different, let's say, layers. So we have definitely a political layer on top. That's for sure. And I think that political layer is marked by economics, because basically whatever economic bottleneck you have at hand or exists, it will be at some point in time, it will be weaponized. You can see that with gas deliveries, you can see that with software. For mobile phones, just ask Huawei or whatever. If somebody does not agree with the way you're acting and he has a way to throttle, to grab you, it will certainly be used that way. And who says that if we're just using foreign technology, that somebody says, you know what, this time it's not against a company, this time it's against a complete continent, for whatever reasons. It can happen. But that's the political layer. Then we have that layer of, let's say, innovation that was previously mentioned a couple times. And I'm sure that we're not just 2 years behind like Senegal in terms of cloud technology, but in terms of concerted action, in terms of market power, we're more or less like 10 years behind. Overall. So we have players that can do stuff, but we don't have the size that we have. And we can't simply counter it the way, for example, it was done in the 70s by creating a GIE like Airbus, which was definitely a company. It was a concerted action. And what we see with GAIA-X is that now we're trying to turn this into a concerted actions by defining standards. And I think that's actually a pretty good way of doing that. Because what prevents all the different companies working together right now is actually a missing set of standards, of compliance, of compatibility. And we all know how important standards are, because if somebody says, this is the standard format for whatever, there will be a technology that will support that. This counts for, let's say, Wi-Fi. Your laptop works with a complete different supplier's Wi-Fi because the Wi-Fi is standardized. A4 is a standardized paper, and that works with every printer. And the same counts for cloud technology. So I think standardization is a very, very important tool in that area to really foster this stuff. It's not necessarily about just throwing tons of money at startups and see if we can create the next super carrier over here. Yeah. Then the other thing is, it's also about, let's say, following our rules and our standards. If you look at the GAIA-X ISBL, there are a lot of companies in there, and I'll get asked on a regular basis, why the hell are these people in the club? And we say, we're an open club, and this is not about who we let in and who is not allowed to be let in. This is about the rules that we define ourselves, that we live by, that we operate. Now, some say GDPR is good enough. So you said initially, why should I care as a user? We have GDPR, so if somebody says it's GDPR compliant, we're all set. But Schrems 2 proved the opposite. It's not good enough. And I think that underneath, the technology is also important. That was the last comment we had over here, that if you want to build something, you need to push for a technology which is available and not just the rules which say what a foreign player has. Else, C1, it will be weaponized.
Yeah, that's of course a very valid remark, Ralf, especially on the technology and the standardization. And don't get me wrong, I'm playing here the devil's advocate. I like standardization as well, and I think we like in many fields around IT standardization. But if I look from a CEO perspective, and especially if I look at the surveys around technology combined with CEO responses, they say it's overly complex IT. And of course, then an Amazon or an Alibaba or even Microsoft, they have a lot of advantage because I have one contact point. If I hear you on GAIA-X, well, I will have a lot of companies making something according to a standard, but what happens when it fails? That will be definitely one of the first things that CEOs will have on their mind if they have to choose something like this. And you can say, okay, you will have a single point of contact, but the response might be a lot slower compared to the giants. And now it's up to you to think about a clever solution or response on that, of course.
Well, one thing is, the internet is a good example. If you take a look at how the European internet actually took off. So there's a nice article, unfortunately, it's in German only. It's an interview with Daniel Karrenberg, who is leading the RIPE. So RIPE sounds English. Of course, it stands for Réseau IP Européen. And of course, it's based in Amsterdam. And of course, it's driven by, or was largely driven by a German guy. And initially, it was not clear which way the European internet would go. So this is also about standards. This is about protocols. You know, these in a certain point in time, Daniel was named the protocol warrior. And you see, this is a multi-stakeholder environment, and apparently it seems to work reliably enough for a lot of companies to put stuff and trust the internet rather than just throwing leased lines from place A to place B. So that's one thing. The second thing is, you said, well, on the hyperscalers, I have a single point of contact. I can rely on that one. I don't have to deal with a complicated bunch of different organizations. That's actually not true, because if you look at how they set up the stuff, the top level is a lot of integrators, partners, consultants, certified parties that actually deal with that one. So it's not as, let's say, homogeneous as it seems to be, even if you deal with one party. And last but not least, well, take a look at your phone. USB-C is probably a pretty good standard, even though some companies say, no, we want to keep our proprietary standard. Yeah. Well, guess what? You will buy the headphones from these guys as well.
Yeah, true. Good answer. I like it.
Mika. I need to second what Ralf is saying, is that of course we have been also in Huawei understanding a long time ago is that we are working through the partners, so that we are not even having an intention to always directly to contact the customer. It doesn't make sense. However, we would like to fertilize the environment what the partners are doing, because then of course that they have to have also this kind of fair share of the ecosystem benefits. And this is of course the game what the Huawei is playing. We are providing certain things. We are knowing where we are good. We are not everywhere good. And then actually we are contacting the partners, especially international and local level, which are taking the last mile to the customers. And this is of course the one way to build the ecosystem. Yes, there might be several contact points like the Ralf is saying, but as I was saying, that we don't either believe that this kind of single point of contact that everything could be get from the Huawei.
Luc, any remarks on this?
Yeah, I would say that in France, for example, the IT ecosystem is made of huge integrators that are in touch with the customers, the enterprise, the B2B market especially. And these guys, they are paid in some way by the big players, American or Chinese ones. And that's why it's difficult to federate with these guys in a European vision of the champions I mentioned before. So that's something that is benefiting the big kids on the block as usual, and that is a bit locking the market and the lobbying in the sector. And then to come back on the previous discussion on the standards, I definitely think that it's a low entry way to make it very clear what Europe wants for the future of internet, especially in the Internet of Things, because the American or Chinese views of Internet of Things is really, I think, opposite and very different from the European way. We could imagine to have something that is at the same time decentralized, that is somehow balanced in terms of governance, and that is safe enough for different organization to deploy at marginal cost their service. And the same for the future framework of the internet, for mobility, and all the aspects that are completely strategic in the future in Europe. So I think we should have politicians that are much more conscious of this stake, and that could propose rules that prepare the future of the European internet, not to have a split internet as it was mentioned this morning, or to have something that is a fight between extra European blocks, and we just are a market to conquer. That would be something that would be a pity. Yeah.
Jean-Paul, would you like something to add?
Yes. First, so in EUCLIDIA, our focus is not standards. We leave this to GAIA-X. Some of our members are contributing, some not. And meanwhile, we have solutions, offers that are already commercialized. We made an exercise by trying to combine European providers and reach the same scope as AWS plus Office 365. And we now have 7 offers that cover about the same scope as AWS plus Office 365, one from Aquaray, one from Clever Cloud, one from RapidSpace, and one from Scaleway. We work together by combining technologies to extend our scope, and now I can say it's available. We're just waiting for more customers and support from governments, and there was no issue collaborating, and we are just as much mutually incompatible as Google and Microsoft are mutually incompatible in a world that doesn't have yet a standard. So we are equally incompatible, equally with a wide scope. We think that there is a need to change a little bit laws in Europe, just like what happened with music or movie industry 20 or 30 years ago. So I was myself doing music in the 90s, techno music with a famous DJ called Laurent Garnier. He is a bit famous, and we were only playing records from the UK or US in France, and the distributors refused to take anything produced locally because they said it was cheaper to take the #1 hit from the top of the pop in the UK or from the US. And no matter what we did, nobody wanted to look at local production. Then a law was created, and this law said that a certain percentage of contents distributed in France had to be produced locally. And of course, this is legal because there's an exception for cultural goods. Software is a cultural good like music or movie. So there is no issue with the World Trade Organization legislation. And for music, in 2 years, suddenly we moved from the stage that nobody wanted to check about the local production to a crazy amount of sales. And now we have the Daft Punk and all sorts of very famous bands that are exporting. So we've seen the current situation with offers that exist for cloud. Well, it was the same for music 30 years ago. And I believe that if we change just a little bit laws to create a certain share of sales that are guaranteed for local offers, this will make the state of the market change immediately. So this is one of the things we are pushing with EUCLIDIA. We already have nearly half of French candidates for the next presidential election supporting it. And we hope to get similar support in all countries for all elections.
No, I like the idea, but I'm going to shoot something in the group which you probably won't like. If I would sit in the United States and hear this, that I change the law to give commercial benefit to somebody else, they would call it communism probably. You've heard the speeches.
But there is a great example with
what are we going to do in a liberal
States.
world?
United States has forced Japan to create a law in Japan that gives a tax discount each time a Japanese company purchases American software. So it's like America created quotas for American software in Japan. So we have examples where United States is actually using this approach of quotas to force foreign trade in the way they like. So we are not preventing US to come to Europe. It's very good that there is competition. Actually, it makes everybody better. But we are just using the same approach as United States in their internal market. And they even do quite impressively things in Japan. Can you imagine? They forced Japanese to purchase quotas of US software. So I don't think there's a negotiation issue on this.
And then I have another question, because I know that in the past European initiatives have failed, also in cloud, also in operating systems that have been launched, and the one I know in Europe is OpenSUSE, but it's still under the radar for the majority of the companies. How are we going to get these offerings correctly into the market? Because at the end, it will be the end user that needs to accept them.
The offerings are there, just like the Daft Punk in 1991. But the public tenders are now all sent to US technologies. So we are really in the same situation as Daft Punk, Laurent Garnier, all kind of European techno music in 1991, which was there, and suddenly something changed in one market, like quotas, then that just accelerated the natural trend of market. This is another thing we see with the big European project. They were always directed at very large companies and ignoring the hundreds of small players actually making the technology. European clouds come from hundreds of small companies. The 7 solutions come from small to mid-sized companies, not from the big ones.
And how are we going to protect them? To be acquired by, how are we going to protect these small companies from being acquired by Americans or Huawei?
There are laws for, there are actually laws for that already in different countries in Europe. But you are right. There is an issue currently in Europe that, for example, we see less often Ericsson or Nokia acquiring a company in Europe than, for example, Microsoft. So you have a very good case on that. Microsoft acquired Metaswitch in the 5G world, in the virtualized 5G. It doesn't happen as often with Nokia or Ericsson because how the stock is valued on European markets. But at the same time, we have laws in Germany after, for example, KUKA was sold to a Chinese investor. Germany set a law to prevent sales of their local players. We've seen things with ASML. In France, we've seen things. I don't think it's the best way to prohibit things, but if there's really no other solution, why not? And anyway, it's already there. So we don't even need to create the law.
If I may say something here.
I need to say that, you know, I'm coming from the Chinese company, and of course, it might be that in Huawei we are thinking differently compared to all the other Chinese companies, but our approach has been a bit different. You know, we have been working in Europe for Europe. As I was saying that our biggest R&D centers outside of the Chinese soil happen to be in Europe because we have been having the best people there and best technologies. But of course, that when some was said a few seconds ago is that like the IoT is different in China. I disagree that heavily. You know, when we are coming as a challenger in the Europe to work here, it means also that we are definitely making the IoT according to European rules and standards. This is a starting point. We don't disagree that, and we are not trying to change the Europe. But of course, that like the Huawei, we are not in the data monetization business. So when we are working with the small European companies, we don't want to purchase those. Actually, they are our best customers because they are trying to get their head over the waterline, and we are trying to provide hardware which is able to make them to do so. So we are seeing there's a great opportunity to work with the small companies, building the European cloud system, and especially when we are knowing is that European data monetization is not our core business in Huawei. We don't want to be in that. We might be doing that in China, but that's a different case. That's a different case. But we are not doing that in Europe, and therefore, of course, we are seeing this totally different compared to US companies. This is just a starting point.
Yeah, good point. I saw that Luc and Ralf wanted to react as well. Luc, go ahead.
Yes. to jump on what Jean-Paul said, I think the vast majority of businesses in Europe can run very well on European suppliers, or almost all European players I have seen last years. And in addition, these suppliers, they have an advantage on the quality price ratio because they are in proximity in terms of service, and that's very important. And on the mechanism to block the attempt to buy up European innovation flagships from outside the EU, the German have defined, but also the French people and other European countries, the operator of vital importance. This can be designed in each sector, in fact, in the pharmaceutical, in the industry, but also in the IT and the digital sector. In the same way that it is easy to understand why a European fighter jet engine manufacturer cannot be acquired by extra European companies. We have players in the artificial intelligence, in robotics, certain deep technologies that Europe must protect, and we should be able to do so at the European level.
Ralf, did you
So actually, one thing linking into the last statement is we're doing it already. For example, the regulatory authorities are looking into the deal where Nvidia wants to purchase ARM, which is British. So that's already happening. But also linking into what Jean-Paul said earlier, I don't think that we have an issue over here with where only the big ones take over the small ones. It's more that we have a different culture over here of the small ones coming up to a level where they can do something. To give you a very simple example, if you have a startup over here and you fail, you're toast. Nobody will ever give you any money again because you have failed. You're burned. If you do the same thing in the Silicon Valley, people will say, hey, I hope that that person has learned its lesson and next time he'll do better than the first time. And that's, for example, just one aspect of the innovation game, but that's a complete different story than and it's only, touching the cloud business on the side.
Yeah, true.
But we have to also remember that the startups and unicorns, they are rather first independent usually, and they, of course, that they are having usually target to make money for themselves. Like last week, the biggest exit was done, most profitable exit was done in Finland in the whole Finnish history. The guys, a small group of guys, were inventing a company following the American principles. They were not even planning to make that profitable. They were just grabbing the market share. And then when all the troubles and clouds were starting to coming together, they were selling that to USA. So they were very, very clever how their intention was, as I was saying, that not create jobs in Europe. Their intention was not to create company in Europe. They actually intention was to make themselves rich. And of course that this is also one of the things is that in Europe, we have to understand that if we are starting to blocking these companies, then they are moving to China and they are moving to United States. They are not going to contribute for the European economy. We just should be making possible that if they are growing here in European soil, they are having good reasons to stay here as well. And at the moment, our challenge seems to be is that we are having clever people, we are having a good supporting system in Europe to make these startups growing and innovative people. But the last step, making those as a profitable companies in European soil, that seems to be missing. And this is something what, of course, we should be enabling. And of course, this is something what I have been personally thinking that the Huawei is doing is that we try to put our equipment in the hand of these smaller companies so that they would be able to go over that edge and start to be contributing for the ecosystem here in Europe. But look was shaking the hand.
They won't move to America or Chinese if they have the possibility to benefit from a continental market at the scale of Europe. That's for sure. And the only reason they want to have an IPO at the NASDAQ or in America, for example, is the addressable market and the capacity to have more finance. So if we can do that exactly the same as in the US, in Europe, and that's what I explained before, this idea of shifting to America, the headquarter and the stakeholder and so on, won't happen. And that's really something we have to do, and putting ourselves in the shoes of the entrepreneurs. And what is the addressable market? What is the chance I have as a unicorn to become a titan staying in Europe? Is there some quotas, as mentioned by other speakers here, to ensure the European hyper growth of these players? Is it possible? For the moment, no. The answer is no. So for sure, you will go to the NASDAQ if you have a short-term interest to do so. And I know many unicorns in France doing that. And that's really a pity. And that's a political problem. And it shouldn't cost that much, but some efforts and some laws to fix it.
I hear what you say, Luc. Two or three comments from me, because I've been very quiet, which is not at all customary for those who know me to be quiet a long time. So 2 or 3 comments on that one. Market-wise, if you look at the US and Europe, we are exactly the same size. The point is, we have 51 states on the one side, which all, quote unquote, have more or less the same culture. So you have more or less the same mentality. Now, I know if there's a redneck listening to us, he will probably not ever admit that he has the same mentality than some kind of yuppie from New York or some kind of other yuppie from the West Coast. But okay, fine. We are more or less mentality-wise on one and the same string. Now, if you come to Europe, you have 27, or let's be kind to that remote island, you have 28 countries with 28 slightly different mentalities, with 28 different regulatory environments, etc., etc., etc. Guys, I mean, it's not your fault, but how the heck are you going to reach a critical mass which will allow you to roll out a solution beyond just France, or beyond just Belgium, or beyond just the Netherlands, or beyond just Denmark? So it is, it all boils down to creating a regulatory environment, that would be my thought, so that you can reach that critical mass. And that critical mass will prevent people from going to NASDAQ or to other stock exchanges and then say, okay, if I cannot reach the critical mass, let me just cash in and leave it there.
Yeah. Well, I would like to come back a bit more to the cloud topic, Ralf. I see you were eager to react. I like to throw another stone in the water. Are we doing it wrong in Europe? Are companies like the Thales, the Atos, Deutsche Telekom, who support the foreign technologies and are aiming for data sovereignty, like I said in the beginning, is that the wrong message we are giving in Europe? Ralf, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just to comment on the last thing, I mean, how many different countries are actually involved in building airplanes under the hood of Airbus? That's one thing. Second thing I would like to answer is, for example, the GAIA-X initiative was also founded cross-border, bottom-up. Second thing, and you see by now there's even interest from Singapore to open up a hub. Singapore doesn't really sound European to me. However, they really like the initiative that much that they're thinking about setting up something over here. And then coming to your question, what's preventing us? I don't think anything is preventing us from doing it. It's just that we're moving at a different pace.
Yeah. Now, coming back to my question.
I'd like to answer to your question, and I would shift the focus from cloud to something called virtual radio access network. Because if you watch others, you are not so emotional. And when you see that people are doing ridiculous decisions on others, where you are not really involved, it's easier to convince and explain. Deutsche Telekom is massively supporting something called Open RAN. It's basically a way to do virtual radio access network that doesn't work, that will never work, and that is heavily pushed by US government. It was pushed even at the previous G7 summit by UK and US. And it really doesn't work by design. Though if you know how 5G works, it's ridiculous. But it has such a strong marketing by something called the Open RAN Policy Alliance, and they visit the minister and the head of Deutsche Telekom and the researcher, and they do the same thing with Orange in France. And the way they do the lobbying is so good. And there is this idea that US is in advance, US is better, and we should push Open RAN to fight against Chinese. This is also part of the message. In the end, you get Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Telefonica, and Vodafone supporting this broken technology. But if you look at virtual radio access networks, the biggest in US in 5G that is deployed is not based on Open RAN. It's based on a European technology called Simple RAN.
Yeah, but is then,
are
we doing it wrong in Europe? The lobbying is wrong.
It's the same for cloud. There is a kind of, like people in Senegal, they feel like they're a colony, they should take things from the white. Here, too many people believe everything should come from US. Then they stop opening their eyes on what exists. And this leaves for the innovators in Europe as only solution, exporting. So this happens everywhere.
So this is actually, I like what Jean-Paul is saying, because of course I'm rather good with the Open RAN. Because we are the market leader, of course, that we have to understand the Open RAN possibilities and disadvantages. And I need to share the disadvantage part with the Jean-Paul. This is exactly like that, because what is missing from Open RAN is things like interoperability. We could be having 1 million different kind of O-RANs around the world. This is just, it could be applying for cloud as well. But of course, I'm a bit concerned, because you have to also remember that it's not always the best technology which has been winning. Like when you are thinking about the Beta 2000 and VHS, Beta 2000 was superior, but it was never winning because there was a commercial reason why it was losing. My concern, like Open RAN, is not to convince any operator that Open RAN is not so good as a technology-wise. I'm concerned about that if there is the marketing money enough, it might be still able to gain a fair share of the market, even if it would be the worst possible technology in this planet, and would be fragmenting even worse further. At the moment, the big players like we are having a very good cooperation with the Nokia and Ericsson and Samsung. We have to guarantee to our customers that, don't worry, independently where the base station is coming from, the router is coming from, where the HLR is coming from, they will be working together. This is the starting point. With O-RAN, it doesn't exist. So there would be suddenly could be 100 different kind of systems which are not working together. And now we are coming back to this cloud system and interoperability, is that we are needing standards, we are needing the rules which are bundling together. Otherwise, this market will be fragmenting, and it's not going to be good for any of us. Okay, sorry, long story once again.
And we do share the technical analysis of Huawei, those that are in the Simple RAN group. But sadly, Huawei refuses to sell their gears, called Remote Radio Head, to any of the players in Europe that have tried to purchase them. So we have hard times actually getting a true collaboration with Huawei for years, despite our presence in China, despite all our contacts. But still, the key was Deutsche Telekom can make stupid decisions with Open RAN, so they can do the same with cloud. And so it's possible that those big companies do stupid decisions.
Of course, they are allowed to. They pay it for themselves, and I see Luc wants to comment. So my question is, do we need more Thierry Bretons to push them to make the right decision then in Europe? And Luc, go ahead. I saw you want to comment.
For sure, we need more Thierry Breton. That's obvious to me, especially when he asked Zuckerberg to pay his taxes in Europe. But I wanted to emphasize a thing we didn't address yet, is that European strategy has been consumer focused for so many decades and should be now business and industry focused. And that means, for example, let it possible to consolidate the mature industry sectors such as telecom. We always have tens of operators in Europe when there are a few in America or China. That's incredibly a nonsense to let such an atomized market. And if we have strong European standards and consolidation on mature market, we can have something serious and keep our big players. And European regulation has prevented telecom consolidation, but also hardware suppliers consolidation, and that's really terrible as an effect.
Final question, gentlemen.
But hey,
because time is...
look, is this making you feel any better that like in China, the basic rule is that if one of the operators in China likes to purchase 5G, for example, there has to be at least 5 vendors offering this before they are allowed to be moving further. So so of course that this is meaning that even the Chinese government is ensuring that there is a competition enough so that and they are not allowing this kind of consolidation happening because it might be killing the competition. And this is of course what they are doing with the big companies like Alibaba and Tencent, and at the moment is that they would like to have a competition. They don't want to go in this kind of monopoly situation. And therefore, of course, I understanding what you are meaning, but also that
you're completely right. And the Chinese state is very clever. They want to have enough competition internally, not to be dependent on the giants. That you are one of them, and that's super clever. And at the same time, they prevent depending on foreign technology too much, and that's also very clever. So I think we should some way learn from what the Chinese state is doing in order to have enough competition, and at the same time, big players that are able to invest a lot in R&D and that are significant at the world level in the global competition. And we have known today in Europe, we are the only continent in the world. You hear me good? We are the only continent in the world not being able during 25 years to build a giant in the technology. That's completely insane, incredible. That's really a pity and a failure of European industrial strategy in terms of digital.
Gentlemen, as I said, time is flying. We have to, alas, interrupt our discussion here. Thank you for having been with us. Thank you for having shared your knowledge, your insights, your very personal ideas very often, because that's what we like to hear on panels like this. Thank you again, Luc Breton from Mandarina. Thank you, Mika LAUHDE from Huawei. Thank you, Ralf HUSTADT from Telendus. And thank you, Jean-Paul SMETS from EUCLIDIA. Thank you, gentlemen, and have a good time and a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.